Hello again, Lew White here. I like to throw words at you that maybe you have heard or maybe you haven't ever heard. And one of these is preterism or preterist, and I'll put that on the screen here. It's the title of the movie, the recording. It's something that happened in the late Middle Ages. It was a word that started to become a useful term, but it was actually originally started by a Jesuit who was trying to explain the fulfillment of prophecies that people find and still talk about being in Daniel and Revelation, and some of the prophecies from Yahusha himself. So, I don't know, it's just something that we don't know much about. It's a word. But it's the unfulfilled prophecies or the fulfilled prophecies. They just try to explain that, oh, that's already been done, and there's no need to worry about that anymore. But prophecies are something that do matter. This is a preterist. I'm going to try to find this the beginning of this information. It's a very short little thing, and I think I'll just dovetail into something else. It's a perspective that prophecies in the book of Daniel, Revelation, and the words of Yahusha about the end times are events that have already occurred in the past. One approach to prophecy involves multiple fulfillments of a single prophecy, such as the abomination set up in the Kodesh place during the days of Antiochus Epiphanes. Daniel talked about an abomination of desolation. Daniel 7:25 foretells a person that would change times and Torah, or law. That's what they call it, Torah. It's instructions. So a person was going to change times, the appointed times, and the Torah, the law, the Torah. Well, the Edict of Constantine in 321 CE forbade the Torah to be observed. You couldn't do it anymore. The Creed of Constantine is a source document that you can look up. Creed of Constantine. I did a video on it, and Dan and I talked about it. Anyway, the Edict of Constantine shifted the day of rest on the seventh day to the first day of every week. People are confused about where that is. I've talked to Jehovah's Witnesses that didn't know what the Sabbath was. They weren't sure. And then there's this Shiva Lingam. That's a word that I'll put up on the screen here. You'll have to look that up. It's a representation of fertility. And it's the highest form of Hindu worship. But the object itself has dominated in the domes and Capitol buildings and a lot of the circus buildings and cathedrals. But it's actually originally a Hindu symbol. And the Al-Aqsa, I have trouble pronouncing this, Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's built on the Temple Mount right now. It's actually modeled after a Hindu Shiva Lingam standing in its yoni. Now those terms, you'll have to look those up and find out what they mean. I don't want to explain it to you, but I'll try to find a picture and put it here. It was built in 691. That was when it was built, 691. It was an Islamic shrine. And there was a black stone involved, and they've got a big dome and this big thing going around it. And anyway, it's set up in a place where it should not be. It's not anything to do with Yahuwah. Yahuwah has no interest in having a Shiva Lingam in the place where he placed his name forever. Now, that fulfills the prophecy of the abomination of desolation being set up in a place where it should not be. And that's mentioned, I think, in several places. Daniel 11:31, Daniel 12:11, Matthew 24:15 through 16. But that last one, Yahusha is speaking, and he added something to describe this abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Daniel was called a prophet by Yahusha. Yahusha added the phrase, quote, "Let the reader understand," unquote, implying the abomination set up in the place it should not be is something being read. Translators have replaced the name of Yahuwah, which they removed, and inserted the word Lord in all capital letters in place of the name. And that was done in the Latin Vulgate also, where they use the word Dominus, which means Lord. And in the Greek text, Kyrios, which means Lord. And this is an abomination that people are reading. Now, most people are awakening to the abomination that they are reading, and it's excused in their prefaces, the preface of your NIV and your NASB, and it's excused in their prefaces being for a long-standing tradition. Oh, just because it's been being done by other people before us, we should just keep doing that. Well, when it's identified, then flee to the mountains, flee to the nations. Preterism is a long-standing eschatological view that interprets prophecies of Scripture as events which have already been fulfilled in prophecy. Do not be deceived. We are Natsarim. That's who we are. Natsarim. Yahusha named us. He didn't say, you are the Christians. He's certainly not a Christian. Even by today's definition, he's not a Christian. The word Christianus in that day meant a poor idiot or a cretin, a poor fellow, a person that was retarded. Yahusha said, I am the vine, Ani Hagafen. You are the Natsarim. Atah HaNatsarim. At Yehukanan, or John, chapter 15, verse 5. He named us, and then he breathed on his disciples. Receive the Ruach HaKodesh. It came out of him. He is the Ruach HaKodesh. Now, let's look at what the circus fathers had to say concerning the Natsarim in their own words. The 4th century circus father, Epiphanius, gave a detailed description of the Natsarim. Quote, we shall now especially consider heretics who call themselves Natsarim. They are mainly Yahudim and nothing else. They make use of not only the New Testament, but they also use in a way the Old Testament. Marcion did that job. In the 4th century, they were calling these things, New Testament, Old Testament. Marcion did that in the 2nd century. He divided Scripture. I have a video on that. Now, continuing. But they also use, in a way, the Old Testament of the Yahudim, for they do not forbid the books of the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. They don't forbid the Torah and the prophets and the writings. Well, who would? Yahusha referred to those all the time. Continuing. So that they are approved of by the Yahudim, from whom the Natsarim do not differ in anything. And they profess all the dogmas pertaining to the prescriptions of the Torah and to the customs of the Yahudim, except that they believe in the Mashiach. They preach that there is but one God and his son Yahusha, the Mashiach. But they are very learned in the Hebrew language. For they, like the Yahudim, read the whole Torah. Then the prophets, they differ from the Yahudim because they believe in Mashiach, and from the Christians in that they are, to this day, bound to the Yahudi rites such as circumcision, the Sabbath, and other ceremonies that would be pertaining to the appointed times, like Passover, unleavened bread, Shavuot, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Shavuot. So you don't even know what I'm talking about. But these are the high Sabbaths. They have the good news according to Matthew in its entirety, in Hebrew. For it is clear, now listen to this last sentence that he wrote, for it is clear that they still preserve this in the Hebrew alphabet as it was originally written, unquote. This is a circus father in the 4th century, Epiphanius, telling us that he was aware that this was the writings of Matthew, and it was written originally in Hebrew. That's not what we're hearing today out of the seminaries. In the 4th century, Eusebius Sophronius Hieronymus, they call him Jerome. He was the one that translated and became what we now know as the Latin Vulgate. He described the Natsarim as, quote, those who accept Mashiach in such a way that they do not cease to observe the old Torah, unquote. Well, this was in stark contrast with their teachings. That was, Eusebius Sophronius Hieronymus. There is written evidence that the Natsarim were targeted by the circus, that's what I call the CHURCH, in the 13th century. The Catholic writings of Bonacursus, I like to call him Bone Crusties, against the heretics, that was the name of his writing, refers to Natsarim. Also labeled Passagini because they lived in the passes and the cliffs. And we were known as Waldensians also because we lived in the walled valleys to hide from the magisterium, that powerful source that was seeking to kill us. And they did. They killed 83 million people over a 600-year period. They hunted them down. They killed them in entire cities in France and other places, using the nobility to do this act of murder. Bonacursus, or Bone Crusties, says, quote, let those who are not yet acquainted with them please note how perverse their belief and doctrine are. First, they teach that we should obey the Torah of Moses according to the letter, which refers to the Sabbath and circumcision on the 8th day of the boy's birth, and the legal precepts which are still in force. Furthermore, to increase their error, they condemn and reject all the circus fathers and the whole Roman circus, unquote. All right, first of all, let me address some of the things that he just said. They obey the Sabbath. Well, Yahusha himself referred to the Sabbath when he said, pray that your flight not be in winter or on the Sabbath in the last days, during the days of distress. That's Matthew 24, verse 20. Yahusha is referring to the future, and of course this refers to they think that everything's changed now because of people like Marcion, who divided Scripture into Old and New, as if the writings themselves are the Old Testament and the New Testament. That's not it. The Old Covenant was the priesthood, and some better would say the animal blood, the offerings. That part is obsolete. Animal blood never redeemed anybody, and it can't. You can rebuild all the temples you want and splash animal blood everywhere. You could kill every animal on the planet. It won't help anybody because that's been superseded by Yahusha's blood, the perfect offering. But these people don't see it. They don't obey the covenant. They don't obey the Ten Commandments. So they are straining to understand. They strain out a gnat, but they swallow a camel. We're still around in the 13th century, according to this guy's writings, the Bone Crusties guy. We're still there. He wrote about us. The Natsarim still obey that old Torah, the covenant, as it is written. The Ten Commandments. I'm your father, honor your father and your mother, you do not murder, you do not break wedlock, you do not steal. Those commandments listed are 10 commandments. And the first 4 involve the covenant sign, the Sabbath. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. Have no other before my face. You do not bow to images. You do not bring the name of Yahuwah, your Elohim, to naught. Or I like to make it easy to understand. You do not ruin the name of Yahuwah. You don't bring it to ruin. You don't throw it away. And they did. That's the abomination of desolation that the reader has to understand when he reads. We're still around in the 13th century on their record. Now this is their record. And the Natsarim still obey. And we still reject all the circus fathers and the whole Roman circus. We're made up of all the tribes everywhere scattered across the earth, living among the nations. And we're awakened because as the prodigal son in the parable found himself awakened, he awakened to himself and said, wait a minute, I'm somebody that shouldn't be living like this. He was living in a pig pen, which is what most people are living in. They're putting up trees in their living rooms. And that's Jeremiah, 10? They cut down a tree in the forest, they drag it into their house and decorate it. What do you think that's talking about? And putting eggs outside on your trees and teaching your children about a bunny rabbit and a man named Santa Claus, who is really, a sun deity called Nimrod. Google the words Santa Claus and Nimrod together. It'll tell you all about them. It's really sun worship. Now, when this prodigal son woke up to himself, he came to himself and he returned to the covenant, the father's household. That's considered perverse by these circus fathers. Oh no, you're going back and obeying those? You must be some kind of heretic. And we are those that are described at Revelation 12 and Revelation 14. And these are happening right now. We hold to the testimony of Yahusha. In other words, we confess and admit that Yahusha is the only name of deliverance. Not the J-Man, that's some made-up name less than 500 years old. And we expose lawlessness by showing it to the world that we obey. And the second thing that we do is we obey the commandments of Yahuwah, not the traditions of the pastors. And for this we're branded as perverse heretics. Jerome was a self-castrated man, and he did that thinking he was helping. Download the free tract, We Are Natsarim, at torazone.net. It's free. It's a 4-page tract, and it tells you all the things that I just discussed with you in this video, and even more. So download it. It's free. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you in the next exciting video. Bye.